our next speaker is Gabriel Hughes. Gabriel is our expert in attribution, a man who can make even attribution sexy and exciting, that I'm really looking forward to hearing, because I've not found it that sexy or exciting before myself. But so remember, enjoy your day and try not to get run over along the way. Thank you very much. Over to Gabriel.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. I don't know about sexy and exciting, but I'll try and make it interesting at the very least. I've been working in the digital sector since the late 90s. I was wondering whether I should say, since the turn of the century. I don't know if people use that phrase to talk about the year 2000. It was actually quite a long time ago, and the industry is still changing rapidly. I've been working on the problem of attribution at Google for the last 4 or 5 years, but it's only really in the last 18 months or so that this statement, that last click is not the whole story, has become relatively uncontroversial. I imagine most people in the room would agree that last click is not the whole story when we're looking at performance and the performance of our digital media. And yet, of course, it is still the standard that is used to measure performance. And that's the problem I want to talk about today when I'm talking about attribution. Now, it's a huge subject, okay? We've heard a lot already today about multiple device use, for example. And that's an increasing problem, because even when we move beyond last click, we have the problem that we tend to be looking at clickstream data that's based on cookie-based tracking, and that tends to be one device, one browser at a time. And it's a big problem, and it's a problem that Google wants to fix, and I know a lot of you want to fix it as well. And frankly, we're not there yet. It's a difficult one. What we do know, though, is that the direction of bias that this increasing sort of fragmentation of device use creates, the direction of that bias is to make user journeys to conversion look, less complex than they really are. It fragments that data, and it makes it look as if there are these short journeys, when in fact there are these much more complex journeys. And we only ever see a snapshot, in any case, of what's going on with the consumer, because we only ever see the bits that we track, that we pay for, right, and that we bid on. And so just bear in mind as we go through this that there's a wider user journey out there, and we can only ever capture part of it. And no matter how we try to get the data and understand the data, there are always these limitations that we have to try and address and build in when we're doing this. So last click is not the whole story. So I'm going to unpack a little bit what that means. I know, as I said, that most of you would agree with it, but let's just delve into sort of what that problem is and why it's a problem, and then let's start to think about how we can solve it. So here we have a conversion journey, and this is just an example, ending with an affiliate click and a sale. And there are many, many paths to conversion, but here's an example journey where the user has gone through a generic search. Maybe they've been exposed to an ad on a display network. Maybe it was retargeted. Then they've made an organic search, a brand search, and then finally they've clicked on the affiliate. And some terminology as we go forward. This is the last click, and we refer to assist clicks and impressions. So we have metrics now in a lot of our platforms, and these assist metrics refer to these clicks and impressions that happen prior to the conversion. A lot of people now, when they talk about attribution, like to use sporting analogies. I don't know if anyone's seen the Google video about multi-channel funnels, but there's a basketball analogy in there, and you shouldn't credit only the guy who pops the ball into the basket. Of course, in Europe and outside of America, it's all football or soccer analogies that we prefer to use. So you shouldn't give all the credit to the striker. You need to think about the midfielders and all the other players. I heard a good one the other day. There was an IAB event on attribution, and the head of research there was talking about his journey to the event. And I wonder, the people in this room can think about your journey today. I imagine some of you, came on the train, and maybe you got a bus, or actually, I don't know how many got a bus, but maybe some of you got a bus, maybe got a taxi. All of these different vehicles have different strengths and weaknesses. The taxi is more expensive, but gets you exactly where you want to go. Okay, the train is faster, but it doesn't get you exactly where you want to go. I think that's quite a nice analogy as well. So it's thinking about that journey. So let's just look at why it matters. This is some research that we did comparing 2 quarters, Q3 and Q4. This was actually back in 2010. And it's looking just at search at the moment. And what we did was we got a whole range of advertisers who had significantly increased their spend in generics in the run-up to Christmas in order to try and obviously boost their sales in that period. And obviously there were more sales in that period, as you might expect. But what's interesting is where that growth came from. Despite the fact that there was this large increase in generic keywords, the growth in conversions mainly came from branded terms. Okay? Although it's a smaller percentage, the base is so much higher. So there's this large increase in conversions on brand terms. So the question is, where did this growth in branded conversions come from? And it's the assist metrics which give the game away, because in fact, it was the brand conversions that were exposed to generic terms that really were behind a very significant proportion of that growth. So that's why it matters, because if you're using last click attribution in your performance, you wouldn't have properly valued the contribution that those generic terms were making. And of course, this argument applies to all kinds of digital media that assist in the journey to conversion. And the reason why is because people take time to convert. These are some figures from a study we did with Nielsen, where we're able to look at multiple advertisers instead of one siloed view at a time of each advertiser in different sectors, a selection of sectors where people do take time to think about what they're doing, research their purchase a little bit. The one that amazes me on this particular chart is the length of time some people take to purchase apparel online. 27 days is the average. And remember, if it's an average, it means that within that distribution, there'll be some people who are taking much, much longer than that to purchase apparel. So what we're saying is that last click is too late. Last click is too late. I'm going to simplify a little bit, okay? Exactly what happens in any user journey is, it varies from case to case. But a typical pattern is that a journey to conversion starts with something like display, social, generic search. The user is going through a process of discovery and decision making. This is especially important for your new customers, if you're attracting new business. People who don't just navigate straight to your site in a single click are often making up their mind about what they want to do, which brand they want to purchase. And the question you have to ask yourselves is, do I want to try and influence people before they've made up their mind or after they've made up their mind, okay? So later on, you would typically see affiliate, brand search, email, these kinds of things, and then sales. And I suppose the point I'm making is that, what you won't see are the sales that the other guy generates through these activities over here. And that if you optimize to the last click, while others optimize to the earlier clicks, then you lose sales. And you won't even see those sales, right? Because the other guy takes them. And just finally, to sort of pin down exactly what the source of bias is, most advertisers use some kind of ROI rule along the lines of minimizing cost per acquisition. Sometimes it's cost per revenue share. That's obviously the typical performance metric that we use. And this metric is it's your cost divided by conversions, and your conversions are counted on that last click. So these assists are all left out of your ROI equation. That's the bias right there. You're using this to optimize your activity, and you're missing the assistive role of these. Okay, so much for the problem. How can we fix the problem? Well, first you need data. Right now, you're scratching the surface if you're not looking at user journey data. We have a number of solutions at Google which supply that user journey and that assistive data. We're not the only ones now, okay? Most of the major SEM tools and most of the ad serving platforms, and of course, now also the tag management solutions, they offer sort of information, data, allowing you to look beyond the last click in that way. So you need that data as your starting point. The solutions I would call out, particularly that Google offers, are, we have search funnels within AdWords, we have multi-channel funnels within Google Analytics, and we also have assist metrics on the DoubleClick platform. So this is an example from a search funnels report, and I don't expect you'll be able to see this particularly well, but I'll just show you, I'll zoom in a second. So in this example, we've got keywords, or this could be campaigns. This is looking at one search account, for example. And then we have, last clicks, assist clicks, and various ratios, which I'll explain. And I just want to give you, before we get into the whole problem of attribution modeling, just a quick insight into how you can use this data to just optimize search in particular. So if we zoom in a little bit here, it's a bit tricky with this board being split up in the way that it is, but you can hopefully see that we've got a column here which is a ratio of assist to last clicks. And if you were using one of these reports or a similar report from another solution or platform, you should be looking at situations where you have a high ratio of assist to last clicks. Okay, this represents a possible keyword or campaign or activity which is could be biased by last click because it's assisting more than it's delivering on last click, and so there's a potential attribution problem there. The other one which I think is quite interesting is this. This is the impression ratio, assist impressions to last click. Search funnels is got a very interesting feature. It allows you to look at impressions that preceded a conversion. Right, so search impressions that preceded a conversion. And I've started calling these dodged bullets. Because if you've got an ad that's driving some conversions, but that's driving a lot of impressions per conversion, then what's going on is that users are converting, right? You're getting consumers to convert, but they're along the way being exposed to your ads and they're not clicking on them. Now, some argue in the case of search that there's a branding effect. And if the ad's in the top position, then I would tend to agree with that. I think it can influence you. I think seeing an ad in the top position in search can influence you to go and buy without you having to click on it. But if, as in the case of a retailer that I spoke to yesterday, you're getting a lot of those assist impressions, but that ad is in the 5th position, for example, then you've dodged a bullet, because I'm willing to bet that if you were to bid a little bit more and go for a higher position, you'd actually drive more conversions. Because your ad is relevant to those searches, but people aren't clicking on it. Now looking at multi-channel funnels, and this opens up the possibility of looking beyond search and into display and into affiliate and into email and all the other channels that you can track and link into your Google Analytics account. We're trying to make it easier. That's what you're trying to achieve. We would always argue that you should seek an evidence basis. So you should form hypothesis from your attribution analysis and your metrics, and then you should seek to test those metrics, right? So in the case of the analysis I showed you earlier, where it appears that generics are driving more value than last click metrics would suggest, then a sensible, if that was your hypothesis, a sensible approach would be to test it. What happens if we spend a bit more on a few generic terms? Does it drive more conversions or not? So, you won't get to the final answers just by sifting through the data. But if you don't sift through the data, you won't identify what are the right questions to ask and where you have potentially an attribution issue. And so really, increasingly, our platforms are allowing people to run multiple attribution models. I'm going to explain, this is really the same thing I just showed you, but just in a kind of idealized cycle. I don't suppose anyone really does this, but in the ideal world, what you would do is you would look at your data, you would ask yourself, is there an attribution question? You would assess the sensitivity of different keywords or ads to different attribution models. You would test hypothesis, right? You would use, experiments, modeling, research to try and establish what the answers to your hypothesis, what the answers to your key questions are, okay? And then you feed those results back into your attribution. You go, okay, I'm going to look at a first click and a last click model because, I think I've got good evidence for believing that's the right way to go, for example. Now, anyone can do attribution modeling. I do get concerned with this topic, and following on as well from Mark's introduction, that, it's not sexy. It is just a case of, there's lots of data and it's very complicated and, what do we do? And we need to, have a group of experts look at this because we can't solve this ourselves. It doesn't have to be like that. Anyone can run attribution modeling as well. You don't necessarily even need a special platform. We've been helping people do it by just exporting data from their Google Analytics account and applying a weighted sum in this way. This is just an arbitrary attribution model. Okay, it's just different ways of assigning credit to these metrics. And how do you decide what the model represents for you? Well, a good way to do is think in terms of marketing objectives. So if your marketing objectives are about introducing the brand, or if they're about brand awareness or something like that, then you would be thinking more in terms of the role of impressions and the role of ads earlier in the consumer journey, as opposed to closing the sale. If you did want to do it, one easy solution that we do have is the Google Analytics Premium Attribution Modeling Tool. So you need to be a Google Analytics Premium customer. If you don't know, we are now selling Google Analytics. It has additional features and service level agreements and so on. And we have now built into it an attribution modeling tool. And you can see that this is very consistent with the philosophy I've just outlined to you, in that it allows you to build up multiple attribution models and compare performance to ask yourself, is there an attribution problem here? So I'm grateful to Greenlight and also to Laura Ashley for allowing us to have a very high-level look at their data and to give you some insights into what you can do with it using the sort of data that I've been talking about. So to begin with, we've looked at channel interaction by conversions. And this nice Venn diagram is something that appears directly in Google Analytics in the standard edition, in the multi-channel funnels piece. And I've added some percentages in there. And due to the way that the Laura Ashley account is set up, we're able to look at referrals, which includes affiliate and email activity, and then organic search and, of course, paid search, and to look at the overlap of these channels in the path to conversion, just the overlap. And I think the overlap's a really great place to start. Suppose you had, the example I gave a moment ago, a theory that your display was driving your search activity. If that was your theory, well, if you could establish what the size of the overlap was in consumer journeys to conversion, what percentage of conversions involve people who both saw the display ad and clicked on a search ad, then that would set the sort of upper limit on that hypothesis. Okay, if that number is 20%, then the size of your synergistic effect, it can't be more than that 20%. Okay. In this case, I think it's quite interesting to look at the organic search, where we see something like 2/3 of conversions involve organic search, but half of those that involve organic search actually involve organic search working in conjunction with referral and with paid search, for example. And that's not untypical. And there's a 5% in the middle there of users who've used all three of those channels. Of course, within these channels, there will be multiple clicks going on. This is the sort of path data that you typically get using these sorts of reports. So in the case of Laura Ashley, we find that 74% of sales revenue involves multiple interactions, and that 42% of sales take longer than a week to convert. I haven't included the time graphic in here, but there's also a graphic that breaks out the time to conversion. And it's also instructive and interesting, and this isn't untypical. If you look here, we've got the percentage of total conversions and conversion value. And you can see that when you look at the single path length, there's more volume in the single clicks than there is value. In other words, the higher value purchases are those, unsurprisingly, which involve multiple clicks to conversion. Of course, as you get onto larger sorts of purchases, more considered purchases like travel, you'd expect that proportion to increase. So I've applied some attribution models to the channels we have got using the attribution modeling tool. And what are these models? Okay, there's nothing magic about them. They're just different ways of sharing credit along the user journey. So first click should be pretty clear what that is. First click is available right now in the GA standard edition as well, I should add, as well as appearing in search funnels. Linear, which shares credit equally, as we saw earlier. Time decay is one I haven't talked about. That's just a case of giving more credit as you get closer to conversion. So that's time decay, and you can alter the rate of decay. It's meant to sort of capture the idea of last click, but not be quite so unfair to all those assisting clicks and impressions. And then the U-shape, the old bathtub model again. In this particular case, it's the referrals which are losing out relative to last click. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with referrals. It just means that referrals tend to win on a last click basis, right? So the email and the affiliates in this particular case. As I say, I'm not saying last click's wrong. I'm just showing you how the direction of movement is when you use these models compared to last click. And that gives you information about how users are getting to your conversion. And then finally, we've gone right down into search. So, it's all very well having information and metrics, but, ultimately what you want to do with these models is adjust those performance metrics. As we established at the start, the source of the bias, the place where it's realized, most commonly is in that CPA metric, that last click CPA metric that's based on last click conversions. So what you can do with this data is you can revalue your CPAs, and you revalue your CPAs by moving those conversions around. You're not inventing conversions out of thin air. What you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to give some of the credit to those conversions to other channels and activities. In this case, because we've got the data, we're able to look at search again, and you do need the cost data, and obviously not having the cost data for the other channels, it's just easier for us to be able to look at search because we've got the cost data right there, obviously with Laura Ashley and Greenlight's permission. And I just compared 3 search campaigns that were going on. So there's, and Greenlight will be able to tell me more about what these campaigns actually involved. But this is lighting accessories, I believe, and then lighting shades. That's lighting, and that's lighting shades here. So this is a sort of includes the Laura Ashley brand term. This would be Laura Ashley pure, and this would be lighting shades. This would be generic. And what this does is it's comparing the way in which the cost per acquisition changes when you compare last click to first click. Okay, so what happens is the first click CPA for the generic terms is 27% cheaper than the last click CPA for generic terms. And the reason why that's happening is because there's a significant proportion of people who are clicking on the lighting shade generic terms and they end up converting elsewhere. Where do they convert? Well, they convert over here on the brand terms. That's why the brand CPA increases by 10%. In case you're wondering why the numbers don't exactly add up, well, of course, the volume on brand terms is so much higher than it is on the generic terms. But overall, the number of conversions stays the same. And that's actually really a common finding, that, as we attribute to earlier clicks, brand CPAs rise while generic and related CPAs fall. And once you've got that information, then you can start saying, fine, how big is the problem? If you've got a situation where, the CPA is, most people have got a target CPA. If you've got a situation where the new CPA that you get from your attribution model suddenly sits in a different place, it comes under your target CPA instead of over it, then you may have an attribution problem, and it may be worth experimenting and testing and seeking evidence, right? So ask yourself the question, could I drive more growth? Could I drive more conversions by investing in this potentially undervalued channel? All right. Oh, and it sort of vanished into thin air. I think I pressed the wrong button. Darkness, a black hole. I hope that isn't what's going on in your heads right now. I hope that you're not thinking, this is just too confusing. Hopefully it's been pretty clear. There was just one more slide. Sorry, guys. I just hit this one. Should I hit it again? Or? Yeah. Do you know what? All the slide says is, thank you very much, and just reminds you that, evidence. It actually says the truth is out there. So, use your attribution. Go on, let's look at that slide. There we are. Remember, the truth is out there. You'll only know for sure if you test. So use your attribution metrics and models to establish where you need to test, and then go out there and test and get evidence. I've only really scratched the surface, but hopefully I've demystified the topic a little bit for you today. Thank you for listening. And